Amid the chaotic Xeno-Bazaar on Proxima Station, the aroma of hot French fries from Earth enveloped me. Just one fry offered to that blue-furred girl, and in an instant, she growled protectively over me like a warrior, forcing everyone to back away. I had no idea. A small act of kindness had bound me to a life debt, leading me into a deadly chase across the galaxy. The chaotic swirl of colors, sounds, and unfamiliar scents washed over Jace Morgan as he navigated the crowded pathways of Proxima Station's Xeno-Bazaar. The artificial lights beamed down on the bazaar floor on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday afternoon, casting strange shadows that danced between the multicolored awnings of countless vendor stalls. Thousands of beings from across the known systems moved around him in a dizzying tapestry of commerce and cultural exchange. Jace, a muscular human contractor in a multi-pocketed vest, wasn't interested in exotic wares or illegal tech modifications today. He was hunting for something far more precious in the vastness of space, a genuine taste of home. And he'd found it. The warm, grease-stained container from the Denabian vendor felt almost sacred in his hands. Real French fries. Not the synthetic protein versions or the strange tuber substitutes. Most stations passed off as authentic Earth cuisine, but actual potatoes, fried in actual oil, with actual salt. In the far reaches of space, such simple pleasures came at premium prices. But Jace didn't care. Some comforts were worth every credit. Finding a relatively quiet spot near a ventilation shaft, he leaned against the wall and popped open the container. The steam that rose carried the unmistakable aroma of home, and he closed his eyes for a moment, savoring the scent before it dissipated into the station's recycled air. When he opened his eyes, he found himself being watched. Vivid orange eyes, glowing with an almost preternatural intensity, were fixed on his container of fries. The eyes belonged to a Philidian, a bipedal feline species with distinctive fur patterns and notorious warrior culture. This particular Philidian had striking blue fur, with darker skin tones visible on her face and hands. She was lean, almost too thin, with a jagged scar across one cheekbone that suggested a difficult past. Jace had encountered Philidians before in his shipping routes, usually as security personnel or mercenaries, but never one who looked so hungry. The intensity of her gaze wasn't threatening, it was longing. He glanced down at his fries, then back at the Philidian female. Her ears were slightly tilted forward, and though she maintained a dignified posture, there was no mistaking the way her eyes tracked every movement of his hand toward the container. "You want to try one?" he asked, extending the container slightly in her direction. The Philidian's eyes widened, pupils dilating with surprise. She looked around quickly, as if expecting some kind of trap, before taking a cautious step forward. Her movements were graceful, despite her apparent wariness. "It's just a French fry," Jace explained with a small smile. "Potato. From Earth. Fried in oil." The Philidian reached out with slender fingers and delicately plucked a single fry from the container. She examined it carefully, bringing it to her nose to sniff before taking a small, tentative bite. The reaction was immediate and astonishing. Her orange eyes flew open, and a sound, half purr, half growl, emanated from her throat. The fry disappeared in 2 more quick bites, and then she stared at Jace with an expression he couldn't quite interpret. Was it gratitude? Surprise? Something else entirely. Before he could offer another, a bulky Taurian, a reptilian species known for their blunt manners, shoulder-checked Jace as he pushed past in the crowded bazaar. "Watch it, soft skin," the Taurian grunted without breaking stride. The words had barely left the Taurian's mouth when the Philidian moved with blinding speed. She positioned herself between Jace and the retreating Taurian, her back arched, fur standing on end, and released a guttural growl that caused nearby shoppers to freeze and stare. The Taurian turned, eyes narrowing as he assessed this unexpected threat. The Philidian's growl intensified, showing teeth that suddenly seemed much sharper than Jace had initially noticed. "Whoa, easy," Jace said, stepping forward to defuse the situation. "It was just a bump. No harm done." The Philidian didn't move from her protective stance, maintaining eye contact with the Taurian until the reptilian finally shrugged and continued on his way. Only then did she relax slightly, though her attention remained focused on scanning the crowd, as if searching for other potential threats. Jace found himself the center of attention as confused and curious onlookers stared at the odd pairing, a human contractor and what appeared to be his ferocious, blue-furred bodyguard. A few whispers reached his ears. "Life debt," someone murmured. "Philidian custom," another replied. Thank you," Jace offered uncertainly. "That wasn't really necessary, but I appreciate the thought." The Philidian turned to face him, her expression solemn. She placed her right fist over her heart and gave a slight bow, a formal gesture he'd never seen from her species before. Then she straightened, took up a position slightly behind his right shoulder, and stood at what could only be described as a guard's attention. Jace stared at her, his half-eaten container of fries cooling in his hand. "Do you want more fries?" he asked, offering the container again. The Philidian shook her head once, a sharp, efficient motion. "Okay, do you want to tell me what's happening here?" The Philidian opened her mouth, but what emerged was a series of clicks, growls, and melodic tones, her native language, completely incomprehensible to Jace without translation. "Right," Jace sighed, looking around the bazaar. "I'm going to need a translator kiosk." He closed the container of fries and slipped it into one of his vest pockets. As he began moving through the crowd, he noticed that the Philidian followed, maintaining the exact same position relative to him, her eyes constantly scanning for threats. More strikingly, he noticed that people were giving them a wider berth than usual in the crowded marketplace. Whatever was happening, Jace had the unsettling feeling that his simple act of sharing a French fry had just complicated his life in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. The Vexillian translation kiosk was tucked away in a quieter corner of the bazaar, its hollow display flickering with the dozens of languages it could process. Jace approached the terminal, acutely aware of the Philidian shadow that had attached herself to him. He inserted his credit chip and selected Philidian from the language menu. The translator booth hummed to life, a shimmering field of translucent energy, creating a privacy barrier around them. "Okay," Jace said, turning to face the blue-furred female. "Let's start with the basics. My name is Jace Morgan. I'm a contract courier. Who are you, and why are you following me?" The Philidian stood at perfect attention, her posture rigid and formal. When she spoke, her natural language flowed through the translator field, emerging as slightly stilted but understandable human standard. "I am Kira, warrior-class Philidian from the southern clans. You have given me sustenance when I was in need. By the laws of my people, I now owe you a life debt that can only be repaid by saving your life or serving as your protector until such opportunity arises." Jace blinked. "A life debt for a French fry?" "The nature of the sustenance is irrelevant," Kira replied solemnly. "It is the act of giving that created the bond. I was hungry. You provided food without demand for payment or service. The debt is now established." "But that's—" Jace stopped himself, remembering cultural sensitivity training from his courier certification. Different species had different customs, and dismissing them outright was both disrespectful and potentially dangerous. "How long does this debt last?" "Until I save your life in equal measure, or until you release me from my obligation. Those are the only ways the debt can be satisfied according to the traditions of my people." Jace ran a hand through his short, cropped hair. "Look, I appreciate the sentiment, but I don't need a bodyguard. I certainly don't need someone growling at everyone who bumps into me in a crowded bazaar." Kira's ears flattened slightly against her head, a sign of embarrassment, Jace guessed. How was I to know the Torian's intentions? She asked, a defensive edge to her translated voice. He could have been an assassin or a thief. An assassin wouldn't announce himself by bumping into me, Jace explained patiently. And I don't have anything worth stealing except maybe my ship, which is docked securely. Kira considered this, her orange eyes studying him intently. You understand the nuances of potential threats in human contexts? I do not. How am I to protect you properly if I cannot identify dangers specific to your kind? The question caught Jace off guard. It was both humble and practical. Not what he'd expected from the fierce warrior who had nearly started a brawl minutes earlier. All right, he said after a moment's consideration. If we're going to be together for a while, we need some ground rules. First, no growling at people unless they're actually threatening me with a weapon or something equally obvious. Second, try to be less conspicuous. You're drawing a lot of attention, which in my line of work isn't always helpful. I can be inconspicuous, Kira asserted, though her bright blue fur and formidable presence suggested otherwise. Third, Jace continued, you need to understand that I move around a lot. I take shipping jobs across multiple systems. I can't guarantee your safety if you're following me. My safety is irrelevant, Kira stated flatly. The debt concerns yours alone. Jace sighed. That's not how partnerships work. If you're going to be around me, I'm going to be concerned about your well-being too. That's how humans operate. This seemed to confuse Kira. Her head tilted slightly, ears perking forward. You would concern yourself with my safety despite having no obligation? Yes, that's called basic decency. Kira was silent for several moments, processing this information. Finally, she gave a short nod. I will adapt to your customs while fulfilling my obligation. I will learn to identify genuine threats according to human standards and remain inconspicuous when possible. The translation booth beeped, indicating their paid time was nearly up. One more thing, Jace said quickly. Where have you been staying on the station? I have been using maintenance corridors and cargo holds since arriving 3 cycles ago. My funds were depleted securing passage here. Jace felt a pang of sympathy. No wonder she'd looked so hungry. 3 days in the cold, utilitarian corridors of Proxima Station with no food would be rough for anyone. All right, he decided. I have a small apartment in the contractor's quarters. You can stay there while we figure this out. At least you'll have a proper place to sleep and regular meals. The translator field flickered and dissolved as their time expired. Kira's expression remained stoic, but Jace thought he detected a slight relaxation in her posture. Relief, perhaps. As they made their way through the bazaar toward the residential sectors, Jace couldn't help noticing the wide berth other patrons gave them. News traveled fast in the station's enclosed ecosystem, and whispers of life debt and Philidian Guardian followed in their wake. Jace's pocket communicator buzzed as they entered the quieter corridors of the contractor's quarters. He pulled it out, seeing a notification for a new job offer with unusually high payment terms. Normally, he'd have been thrilled at such an opportunity. But now he glanced uncertainly at his blue-furred shadow. How exactly was he supposed to continue his work with a Philidian bodyguard who growled at anyone who came too close? As if reading his thoughts, Kira's ears twitched forward, her orange eyes meeting his with what appeared to be determination. This arrangement was going to be complicated, Jace realized, and he had a sinking feeling that sharing a French fry was just the beginning of a much larger entanglement. Jace's apartment in the contractor's quarters wasn't much to look at. A standard modular unit with minimal personalization. But after 3 days of hiding in maintenance shafts, Kira seemed to regard it with cautious appreciation. Her orange eyes scanned the small living space, cataloging exits, potential defensive positions, and signs of Jace's personality. The apartment was sparsely furnished but had distinct touches that marked it as human-occupied. A vintage Earth poster for something called the Maltese Falcon adorned one wall. A small shelf held actual paper books, a rarity in space, and a single potted plant struggled for life near the room's only window, which looked out on the station's inner ring. "Sit anywhere you like," Jace offered, watching as Kira hesitated by the door. "Are you hungry? I can order something from the station's commissary." Kira remained standing, her posture still formal. "I require minimal sustenance to function effectively, as your guardian." Jace suppressed a smile. "That wasn't what I asked. Are you hungry?" After a moment's hesitation, Kira gave a single, sharp nod. "Right," Jace said, moving to the small console near what passed for a kitchen. "Let me guess. Meat protein, minimal processing." "That would be acceptable." Jace placed an order for 2 meals, a synthetic beef bowl for himself, and what the menu described as prime carnivore selection for his unexpected guest. While they waited, he gestured again to the small seating area. "Seriously, you can sit down. Standing at attention the whole time is going to make both of us uncomfortable." Kira finally relented, perching awkwardly on the edge of a chair. Her tail, which Jace hadn't paid much attention to before, curled around her feet, the tip occasionally twitching in what he assumed was the Philidian equivalent of fidgeting. "So," Jace began, sitting across from her, "tell me more about this life debt. How common is it among your people?" "Life debts are sacred bonds," Kira explained, her voice carrying that slightly mechanical quality all translated speech had. "They are not entered into lightly. Most Philidians will experience 1 or 2 in their lifetime, either as debtor or recipient." "And you've never had one before?" "I have been both debtor and recipient," she said, her tone shifting subtly. "My previous debt was resolved 3 stellar cycles ago." The way she said resolved made Jace suspect there was more to that story. But he didn't press. Instead, he asked, "What exactly are the terms of this arrangement? What am I supposed to do as the recipient of your debt?" "You need do nothing except allow me to fulfill my obligation," Kira said. "I must remain vigilant for threats to your safety, and intervene when necessary. When I have saved your life in measure equal to how you saved mine, the debt will be balanced." "But I didn't save your life," Jace pointed out. "I gave you a French fry." "I had not eaten in 3 cycles. The station's security forces had driven me from 2 potential food sources. My body was beginning to consume its own tissue for survival." Her orange eyes fixed on him with startling intensity. "You may not have realized it, but your action prevented my physical decline. Among my people, this constitutes life-saving intervention." Jace felt a wave of sympathy. He'd suspected she was hungry, but not that she'd been starving. "I'm sorry, I didn't know." "There is no need for apology. The debt is mine to bear, not yours." The apartment's delivery slot chimed, announcing the arrival of their food. Jace retrieved the sealed containers and set them on the small table between them. The aroma of seasoned meat filled the small space, and he noticed Kira's nostrils flare slightly, though she made no move toward the food. "Go ahead," he encouraged, opening his own container. "No need to stand on ceremony." Kira carefully opened her meal. Inside was an assortment of what appeared to be various synthetic meat products, prepared rare. She hesitated only briefly before beginning to eat with controlled, precise movements that nonetheless conveyed genuine hunger. They ate in silence for a few minutes before Jace's communicator buzzed again, a reminder about the job offer he'd received earlier. He pulled out the device and scanned the details more carefully this time. "Interesting," he murmured. "What is it?" Kira asked, her attention immediately shifting from her meal to potential concerns. "A job offer. Good pay. Too good, actually, which makes me suspicious. Pickup from Dock 17, delivery to Helios Colony. Needs to be completed in 48 hours. He looked up at Kira. "I should check it out, but this might be complicated with you in tow." "I can adapt," Kira insisted, I have training in stealth and surveillance. I can remain undetected if necessary." Jace raised an eyebrow, looking pointedly at her bright blue fur. Kira's ears flattened slightly. Perception is not merely about visual concealment. It is about controlling attention and expectation. I can become less noticeable, even if not invisible. "All right," Jace decided, finishing the last of his meal. "We'll check out this job together. But if anything feels off, we walk away. My courier reputation depends on reliability, not desperation." Kira nodded, setting aside her empty container. "When do we depart?" "The pickup window opens in 3 hours at Dock 17. We should get there early to assess the situation." Jace stood, stretching. "In the meantime, you should rest. There's a sleep pod in the alcove. I need to check a few things before we go."
"I do not require—"
"Rest," Jace interrupted firmly. "That's not a suggestion. If you're going to be my guardian, I need you at full capacity." Kira seemed about to object further, but instead gave a short nod and moved toward the alcove. She paused at the entrance, glancing back at him. "Your consideration is unexpected," she said quietly. "Thank you, Jace Morgan." As she disappeared into the alcove, Jace turned his attention back to the job details, trying to ignore the strange mixture of concern and curiosity that had been building since their encounter in the bazaar. Something about this situation felt simultaneously absurd and significant. A random act of kindness spiraling into an arrangement he couldn't yet fully comprehend. Whatever happened next, he had a feeling his life had just become considerably more complicated than he'd bargained for. 3 hours later, Jace and Kira approached Dock 17 through the less trafficked maintenance corridors of Proxima Station. Jace had chosen this route both to avoid drawing attention and to test Kira's claim about being able to move inconspicuously. To his surprise, she had demonstrated remarkable adaptability. Gone was the rigid, attention-drawing posture from earlier. Now she moved with a fluid, almost casual gait, her head slightly lowered to minimize her height. She'd also found a way to partially cover her distinctive blue fur with a gray utility worker's jacket Jace had loaned her, with the hood pulled up to shadow her face. Most impressive was how she'd modulated her presence. Jace couldn't quite explain how, but she somehow projected an aura of such perfect ordinariness that even he found his attention sliding past her, unless he deliberately focused. "Impressive," he admitted as they neared their destination. "How do you do that?" "Most sentient species see what they expect to see," Kira explained quietly. "I simply ensure I am not what they expect to notice." Dock 17 was located in a less reputable section of the station, the perfect place for exchanges that preferred minimal oversight. The security cameras in this area were notoriously malfunctioning, and station security patrols were infrequent at best. Jace checked his communicator as they approached. "We're still 30 minutes early. Let's survey the area before making contact." Kira nodded, her orange eyes gleaming from beneath the hood as she scanned their surroundings. The dock was relatively quiet. A few maintenance droids, a couple of cargo handlers loading supplies onto a small transport, and a group of 3 humans lounging near one of the support pillars, seemingly waiting for someone. "Those 3 are armed," Kira whispered, nodding subtly toward the group. "Concealed weapons, but their posture betrays the weight distribution." Jace frowned, studying the trio more carefully. There was nothing overtly threatening about them, but something in their positioning, spread out with clear sightlines to all dock entrances, raised his professional paranoia. Years of courier work had honed his instincts for trouble, and this situation was triggering all of them. "Let's circle around," he decided. "I want to see what we're dealing with before making contact." They moved through the shadowed perimeter of the dock, using cargo containers and service equipment as cover. As they approached from a different angle, Jace caught a glimpse of conversation between the 3 humans. "Morgan should be here soon," one was saying, a tall, scarred man who seemed to be the leader. "Remember, Blackwood wants this clean. Get the package. Eliminate the courier. No witnesses." Jace froze, blood running cold. They weren't the client's representatives. They were here to ambush him. He turned to warn Kira, but she was already in motion. Her eyes narrowed to dangerous slits. Her earlier camouflage persona completely shed. Before he could stop her, she'd slipped away, moving with predatory purpose toward the group. "Kira, wait!" Jace hissed, but she was already beyond hearing range. He cursed under his breath and moved to a better position, drawing the small stun pistol he carried for emergencies. If this turned into a firefight, the station's security would be on them within minutes. Job legitimacy be damned. What happened next occurred so quickly that Jace barely had time to process it. Kira emerged from behind a cargo container, directly in the path of the armed trio. The leader, Decker, Jace presumed from the overhead conversation, reached for his weapon, but Kira was faster. Her movement was a blur of controlled violence. She dropped low, sweeping the legs from under the first man before he could even register her presence. As he fell, she was already pivoting toward the second, her clawed hand striking with surgical precision at the nerve cluster in his neck. He collapsed without a sound. Decker managed to draw his weapon, a military-grade pulse pistol that would have turned Kira to ash. But she was inside his guard before he could aim, one hand gripping his wrist with crushing force, while the other delivered a precise strike to his solar plexus. The gun clattered to the deck as Decker doubled over, gasping for breath. Kira's growl, low, menacing, and unmistakably threatening, echoed in the suddenly silent dock. She stood over the three incapacitated men, her tail lashing, fur raised along her spine. Jace approached cautiously, keeping his stun pistol trained on the fallen attackers. "That was efficient," he managed, genuinely impressed despite the circumstances. Kira turned to him, her orange eyes still blazing with combat focus. "They intended you harm. The debt required intervention." "Yeah, I gathered that." Jace knelt beside Decker, who was still conscious, but struggling to breathe normally. "Who's Blackwood, and why does he want me dead?" Decker glared up at him, hatred written across his scarred features. "You're already dead, Morgan. You just don't know it yet." Jace checked the man's pockets, finding a small data chip and what appeared to be a remote detonator. "What's this for?" he demanded, holding up the detonator. When Decker refused to answer, Kira knelt beside him, her growl deepening to a frequency that seemed to vibrate the very air. "Answer him," she said simply. Something in her tone, or perhaps the sight of her claws flexing near his throat, loosened Decker's resolve. "The package," he gasped. "It's rigged. Biological agent. Set to disperse when you dock at Helios. You'd be blamed for the attack." Jace felt sick. "Where's the package now?" "Storage locker 1742, key code 5591. Jace pocketed the data chip and detonator, then used Decker's own restraints to secure the three attackers. "Station security will find you eventually," he told them. "If you're lucky, they'll get here before you wake up." He nodded to Kira, and they quickly made their way to the storage lockers. Locker 1742 opened with the provided code, revealing a standard shipping container, the kind Jace transported regularly. What wasn't standard was the modified containment field and the sophisticated dispersal mechanism attached to its interior. "Biological weapon?" Kira asked, her nose wrinkling at some scent Jace couldn't detect. "Looks that way. Designed to make it appear I was transporting a bioweapon to Helios Colony." Jace carefully examined the device without touching it. "This is military-grade tech. Whoever this Blackwood is, they have serious connections. What will you do with it?" Jace considered for a moment, then made a decision. "We're going to disarm it, document everything, and then I'm going to find out who tried to set me up as a terrorist, Using the skills he'd acquired in his less-than-legal early career, Jace methodically disabled the dispersal mechanism, while Kira stood guard. The biocontainment field he left intact. Whatever was inside was still dangerous, even if it couldn't be weaponized now. "We need to move," Jace said, securing the disabled container. "Someone paid those thugs, and when they don't report in, there will be others." "Where will we go?" Kira asked, seamlessly shifting back into her inconspicuous persona as they left the storage area. "First, back to my apartment to gather supplies, then to my ship." Jace's expression was grim. "Someone powerful wants to frame me as a terrorist. I need to find out who and why before they try again." As they made their way through the station's corridors, Jace's mind raced. The name Blackwood meant nothing to him, but the sophistication of the plot suggested resources and connections far beyond the usual station criminals. Whoever was behind this had access to military-grade bioweapons and enough influence to arrange a complex frame job. "You are troubled," Kira observed quietly as they entered a less populated corridor. "Someone just tried to set me up as a mass murderer," Jace replied dryly. "I'd say that warrants some concern. The immediate threat has been neutralized. We will address subsequent threats as they emerge." Her tone was matter-of-fact, almost reassuring in its simplicity. Jace glanced at her, struck by the strange comfort of having someone so absolutely committed to his safety. The situation was dire, but for the first time in years, he wasn't facing danger alone. "This person must be powerful to command such resources," Kira continued thoughtfully. "They will not abandon their purpose easily. We must identify them to effectively counter their efforts." "We need information," Jace agreed, "and I know just where to start looking." They reached his apartment without incident, though Jace noticed Kira's heightened alertness, her eyes constantly scanning for potential threats. He quickly gathered essential supplies, emergency credits, identification documents, spare clothing, and a more substantial weapon than his stun pistol. "We're heading to Club Paradox," he explained, as they prepared to leave. "There's an information broker there who might know something about this Blackwood character." Kira's ears flicked forward with interest. "Will this information broker be cooperative?" "For the right price. Allura Voss is always cooperative." Jace checked his weapon one last time before concealing it under his jacket. "But Club Paradox caters to the station's elite. You'll need to be less protective there. No growling unless someone actually tries to kill me." Kira's expression remained neutral, but he thought he detected a slight twitch of her whiskers, the Philidian equivalent of a smirk, perhaps. "I will endeavor to contain my protective instincts," she promised solemnly. "Unless your life is genuinely threatened." "That's all I ask," Jace said, surprised to find himself smiling despite the circumstances. "Now, let's go find out who wants me dead." Club Paradox lived up to its name, a bewildering blend of luxury and danger nestled in Proxima Station's upper levels. Its entrance was deceptively understated. A simple archway guarded by a single, immaculately dressed Vexillian, whose 6 eyes missed nothing. Jace approached confidently, Kira following just behind him. She'd managed to transform her appearance again, this time adopting the aloof, slightly bored demeanor of the elite personal guards that often accompanied wealthy patrons. The utility jacket was gone, replaced by a fitted black garment Jace had found in his storage unit, designed for a different species, but close enough to pass casual inspection. "Jace Morgan," he told the doorkeeper. "Here to see Allura Voss." The Vexillian's multiple eyes blinked in sequence, a gesture Jace knew indicated skepticism. "Ms. Voss does not record appointments with contractors," the doorkeeper said, the translator implant in his throat giving his voice an artificial smoothness. "Tell her it's about Sentinel Dynamics," Jace replied, dropping the name of a security firm he'd spotted on the data chip recovered from Decker. It was a gamble, but one worth taking. The Vexillian stared at him for a long moment before touching a discreet communicator at his wrist. After a brief, sub-vocalized conversation, he stepped aside. Ms. Voss will see you in the Azure alcove. Your companion may accompany you, but weapons are not permitted. Jace surrendered his stun pistol without argument. Kira, who carried no visible weapons, was subjected to a more thorough scan before being allowed to pass. If the Vexillian noticed her natural claws, or recognized her species' combat capabilities, he gave no indication. The interior of Club Paradox was a marvel of high-end station engineering. Gravity modulators created floating conversation pods, where patrons reclined in midair. Bioluminescent organisms embedded in the walls pulsed in hypnotic patterns. The central bar featured actual water, a luxury in space, flowing in an impossible upward spiral. The clientele was equally impressive. Corporate executives, political attachés, wealthy merchants, and the occasional discreet mercenary or spy. This was where the real business of Proxima Station took place, far from the bureaucratic oversight of the official administration. The Azure alcove was a semi-private booth toward the back, illuminated by a soft blue glow that gave everything within it a subaquatic appearance. Seated inside was Allura Voss, or Lara, as Jace had known her years ago when they'd both worked less reputable jobs. Jace Morgan, she greeted him, her voice carrying the slight accent of old Earth Europe. Still getting yourself into trouble. I see. Allura was human, or at least appeared so, though rumors suggested extensive genetic modifications beneath her flawless exterior. Her silver-white hair was cut in a severe bob that accentuated her sharp features, and her eyes, currently a vivid purple, were known to change color with her moods. Trouble found me this time, Jace replied, sliding into the booth across from her. Kira remained standing, positioning herself where she could observe both their conversation and the surrounding club. Allura's gaze flicked to Kira, one elegant eyebrow rising. A Philidian guard? You've moved up in the world. It's a recent arrangement, Jace said vaguely. I need information, Lara. Information is my business. Payment first, questions after. She held out a slender hand, her nails glinting with embedded tech that probably contained more computing power than Jace's entire ship. Jace transferred a substantial amount of credits from his emergency fund. I need to know about Blackwood, connected to Sentinel Dynamics. Allura's expression didn't change, but Jace noticed her eyes shift from purple to a more cautious gray. Interesting question. Why ask it? Someone tried to frame me as a bioterrorist today. Used Blackwood's name. I'd like to know why someone I've never heard of wants me taking the fall for mass murder. Allura sipped from a glass containing an iridescent liquid. Naomi Blackwood is not someone whose attention you want. Jace, director of Sentinel Dynamics, former Earth intelligence operative with connections throughout the corporate and political elite. If she's targeting you, there's a reason. Naomi Blackwood? Jace frowned. The name meant nothing to him. I've never dealt with anyone at that level. Perhaps not knowingly. Allura's eyes scanned the club briefly before returning to him. What was the intended target? Helios Colony. Something about disrupting a research facility. Allura nodded slowly. European research facility. They're working on a new FTL drive system, one that wouldn't rely on the current monopolies for fuel or components. The pieces began falling into place in Jace's mind. And Sentinel Dynamics has contracts with the current FTL providers. Among others, Allura finished her drink. Blackwood specializes in making problems disappear for her clients. A terrorist attack that disrupts competitive research while eliminating a potentially troublesome courier? Efficient. I still don't understand why she chose me. Allura's eyes shifted to a knowing amber. Dr. Charleston at the European facility requested you specifically for a delivery last month. Data crystals containing early research findings. Jace remembered the job, A routine data delivery. Nothing that should have attracted high-level attention. That was just standard courier work. Not to Blackwood, apparently. Allura leaned forward. My advice? Disappear for a while. Change your identity. Find a new profession. Once you're on her list, you rarely come off it alive. Before Jace could respond, Kira's posture shifted subtly. Following her gaze, he noticed two men in nondescript clothing moving purposefully through the club, their eyes scanning the patrons. We have company, he murmured to Allura. She didn't turn to look. Back exit, through the service corridor. Security code 4290. I was never here. You were never here. Jace nodded, sliding out of the booth. Thanks. Lara.
Don't thank me,
She replied, her eyes now a cold blue. Just stay alive. As they made their way toward the back of the club, Jace noticed the two men had spotted them and were changing direction to intercept. He quickened his pace, Kira moving smoothly beside him. If they follow us into the service corridor, they're hostile, he told her quietly. No lethal force unless absolutely necessary. Kira gave a nearly imperceptible nod. Her earlier performance of aloof guard completely replaced by focused readiness. They reached the service door, Jace quickly entering the code Allura had provided. As it slid open, he glanced back to see the two men breaking into a run, hands moving toward concealed weapons. Definitely hostile, he muttered as they slipped through the door. Let's move. The service corridor was dimly lit and narrow, designed for the movement of supplies rather than people. They moved quickly, hearing the door open again behind them as their pursuers followed. Split up, Kira suggested, her voice low. No, they're after me. You stay with... The words died in his throat as energy fire scorched the wall beside them. Their pursuers had abandoned subtlety for direct action. Take the right fork, Jace directed, drawing the backup weapon he'd concealed from the club's scanners. I'll hold them here. Kira's response was not what he expected. Instead of obeying, she shoved him roughly toward the right passage, then turned to face their attackers with a growl that echoed through the narrow space. Kira! Jace shouted, but she was already advancing toward the threat, her body low and predatory. The first attacker rounded the corner and fired again, but Kira was no longer where she had been. She jumped to the ceiling, her claws finding purchase in the metal panels, and dropped behind the man with devastating precision. He went down without a sound, his weapon clattering across the floor. The second attacker was more cautious, using his fallen colleague as cover while he tried to get a clear shot at Jace. But Kira had positioned herself directly in the line of fire, her growl now a continuous, unsettling sound that seemed to unnerve even the professional hitman. Stand down, the man shouted. This isn't your fight, Philidian! Kira's response was to launch herself forward in a blur of motion, evading his first shot and closing the distance before he could fire again. There was a brief, violent struggle, and then silence. Jace approached cautiously, weapon ready. But there was no need. Both attackers were unconscious, efficiently disabled without lethal damage. Kira stood over them, her breathing slightly elevated but otherwise showing no signs of exertion. We should go, she said simply. Others may follow. Jace nodded, holstering his weapon. My ship is docked in Bay 42. We need to move quickly. As they made their way through the station's less-traveled corridors, avoiding security cameras and patrols, Jace found himself re-evaluating his blue-furred companion. Her combat skills were exceptional, but it was her judgment that impressed him most. She'd neutralized the threat without killing, understanding instinctively that dead bodies would complicate their situation further. Who trained you? He asked, as they approached the docking bays. I was warrior class, Kira replied. All Philidians receive combat training, but those of us selected for warrior designation undergo more extensive preparation. You're very good. She glanced at him, something like pride briefly visible in her orange eyes. The debt requires nothing less than my best efforts. They reached Bay 42 without further incident. Jace's ship, the Starbound, was a mid-sized courier vessel, older but well-maintained, with modifications that weren't listed in any official registry. It wasn't beautiful, but it was fast and reliable, two qualities that had kept him alive and employed for years. "Welcome aboard," he said as the entry ramp descended at his command. "It's not fancy, but it's home." Kira followed him inside, her eyes taking in every detail of the ship's interior with professional assessment. The main cabin was cramped but functional, with the lived-in appearance of a space that served as both workplace and residence. Jace moved to the cockpit, beginning the pre-flight sequence. "Strap in," he told Kira. "We're heading to Europa. If Blackwood is targeting Dr. Charleston's research, he needs to be warned." Kira took the co-pilot's seat, examining the unfamiliar controls with evident curiosity. "You intend to confront this threat directly?" "I intend to clear my name and stop whatever Blackwood is planning," Jace replied, his hands moving confidently across the ship's systems. "Dr. Charleston is a good man doing important work. If someone's trying to sabotage that while framing me in the process, I want to know why." The ship's engines hummed to life, the familiar vibration running through the deck plates. Jace felt a strange sense of certainty as he initiated the launch sequence. What had begun with a simple act of sharing food had somehow led him into direct conflict with one of the most powerful and dangerous individuals in the system. As the Starbound detached from Proxima Station and accelerated toward open space, Jace glanced at his unlikely companion. Kira sat alert in the co-pilot's chair, her orange eyes fixed on the viewport, watching the stars emerge as they left the station behind. "Have you ever been to Europa?" he asked. "No," she answered, her gaze still on the stars. "My travels have been limited to the outer colonies and trading stations." "It's beautiful, almost entirely covered in ice, with an ocean beneath. The research facility is built into the ice shelf, using the ocean for cooling their more energetic experiments." Kira turned to look at him. "You admire this Dr. Charleston." It wasn't a question, but Jace nodded anyway. "He's brilliant, working on FTL technology that could make interstellar travel affordable for everyone, not just corporations and governments. If he succeeds, it would change everything. And threaten those who profit from the current system," Kira observed. "Exactly. People like Blackwood and her clients." Jace programmed the course to Europa, then engaged the autopilot. "We have about 16 hours before we arrive. You should get some rest." "I will maintain vigilance," Kira replied predictably. Jace sighed. "Kira, we're in deep space. There are no threats here that either of us can do anything about. If something goes wrong with the ship, the alarms will wake us both. Please, rest." She seemed to struggle with this logic, her ears flicking back and forth as she considered his words. Finally, she gave a reluctant nod. "I will rest in cycles. 2 hours sleep, 2 hours vigilance." "That's not," Jace began, then stopped himself. It was progress, at least. "Fine. There's a spare berth in the crew quarters. Make yourself comfortable." As Kira left the cockpit, Jace leaned back in his chair, watching the stars streak by. In just one day, his relatively straightforward life had transformed into something far more complicated. He had a Philidian bodyguard bound by a life debt, a powerful enemy he'd never met, and was heading directly toward what might be a trap. And it had all started with a French fry. The journey to Europa passed without incident, though Jace noticed that Kira had indeed maintained her self-imposed watch schedule, appearing in the cockpit with clockwork precision every 2 hours. He'd given up trying to convince her to rest normally, recognizing the futility of arguing with Philidian tradition. As they approached the Jovian system, the massive form of Jupiter dominated the viewport, its swirling storms and bands of clouds a magnificent sight against the blackness of space. Europa, by comparison, was a small, ice-white moon, seemingly insignificant next to its gas giant parent. "Entering Europa's orbital space," Jace announced, taking manual control of the ship. "The research facility is on the Jupiter-facing side, built into the thickest part of the ice shelf." Kira observed the approaching moon with evident interest. "It appears uninhabitable. The surface is... Radiation from Jupiter would kill an unprotected human in hours. But beneath the ice is an ocean larger than all of Earth's combined. And the facility is shielded from the radiation." Jace adjusted their approach vector, responding to automated guidance signals from the facility. Some researchers believe there might even be native life in those waters, though nothing confirmed yet. Their descent toward Europa's surface was smooth, the starbound systems interfacing with the facility's guidance network. As they dropped below the cloud layer, the endless white landscape of ice came into view, cracked and ridged in patterns that spoke of the liquid ocean constantly shifting beneath the frozen crust. The European Research Facility appeared on the horizon, a collection of low, dome-shaped structures connected by enclosed tunnels, all half buried in the ice. Landing pads extended from one side, illuminated by powerful lights that cut through the perpetual twilight of Europa's Jupiter-facing side. "European Research Facility. This is courier vessel Starbound requesting clearance to dock," Jace transmitted. "Authorization code Charleston 7 Delta 9. There was a brief pause before a response came through. "Starbound. This is European Control. Your authorization is valid, but we have a security flag on your vessel. Please proceed to Quarantine Dock Alpha 3 for inspection." Jace frowned. "Security flag? What's going on?"
Unknown vessel. Please acknowledge and comply with routing instructions."
"Acknowledged. Control. Proceeding to Alpha 3. Jace cut the transmission and glanced at Kira. "They're expecting trouble. Blackwood has warned them," Kira observed. "We must proceed cautiously." The quarantine dock was separated from the main facility, with its own airlock and security protocols. As they landed, Jace could see armed security personnel assembling outside the ship. "Let me do the talking," he told Kira. "And please, no growling or fighting unless they actually try to kill us." "I will restrain myself," Kira promised, though her posture suggested she was preparing for potential conflict. They exited the ship with hands visible, facing a squad of security officers in the facility's blue and white uniforms. The leader, a stern-faced woman with captain's insignia, stepped forward. "Jace Morgan, I'm Security Captain Reyes. You and your companion will submit to full biometric scanning and questioning before being allowed into the main facility." "Of course," Jace agreed readily. "But I need to speak with Dr. Charleston immediately. There's a serious threat to his research." Reyes's expression remained impassive. "Dr. Charleston is aware of your arrival. He'll see you if the security screening clears you." The screening was thorough, but professional. They were scanned for weapons, biological agents, and technological tampering. Their identities were verified, Kira's causing some confusion in the system until she was registered as a diplomatic escort, a designation that seemed to satisfy the security protocols. Finally, they were escorted through a series of airlocks and tunnels into the main research complex. The interior was a stark contrast to the frozen wasteland outside, brightly lit, climate-controlled, and humming with activity. Researchers in lab coats moved purposefully through the corridors, while information displays showed real-time data from various experiments. They were led to a conference room where Dr. Eleanor Charleston waited, his tall, slender frame bent over a data terminal. He looked up as they entered, his expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Jace," he greeted, standing to his full height, nearly 7 feet, characteristic of those born and raised in the lower gravity of Mars. "I must say, your timing is troubling." "Dr. Charleston," Jace replied with genuine respect. "This is Kira, my associate. We need to talk about Naomi Blackwood and the threat to your research." Charleston's eyebrows rose. "Interesting, Please, sit. As they took seats around the conference table, Charleston dismissed the security officers with a gesture. When they were alone, he leaned forward, his voice lowered. I received a communication yesterday warning that you were planning to sabotage our work. The sender identified themselves as a security consultant from Sentinel Dynamics. Blackwood, Jace confirmed grimly. She tried to frame me as a bioterrorist at Proxima Station. The plan was to have me deliver a biological weapon here, timed to disperse on arrival. Charleston's expression darkened. That would have been catastrophic. Our life support systems are interconnected throughout the facility. I disabled the device and left it secured at Proxima. But that was just the first attempt. Blackwood doesn't want your FTL research to succeed. Doctor. Yes. I've suspected interference for some time. Charleston ran a hand through his silver-streaked hair. Equipment failures, data corruption, funding delays. All could be explained by normal research challenges. But the pattern suggested something more deliberate. She has resources and connections, Jace warned. And now she knows I've come here. Charleston nodded thoughtfully. Then we must assume she has assets within the facility as well. The question is, what? He was interrupted by a sudden blaring alarm. Red emergency lights began flashing throughout the room and corridor beyond. Warning, Sector 7 cooling system failure, containment breach imminent. All personnel evacuate immediately. Charleston paled. Sector 7 is our main FTL testing lab. If the cooling system fails completely, the test materials will overheat and explode, Jace finished, already on his feet. Blackwood's making her move. The facility's automatic safety protocols will seal off Sector 7 in 3 minutes, Charleston said, moving toward the door. After that, even I won't be able to override them. Kira, who had remained silent during their conversation, spoke up. Where is this Sector 7? 2 levels down, East Quadrant, Charleston replied, leading them into the corridor where facility staff were already evacuating in the opposite direction. We need to move, Jace urged, following Charleston toward the emergency stairwell. If this is Blackwood's play, she'll have people making sure the cooling system doesn't get fixed in time. They descended rapidly, Charleston using his security clearance to bypass lockdown protocols that were already engaging throughout the facility. The lower level was filling with acrid smoke, and the temperature was noticeably rising as they approached Sector 7. The cooling system uses supercooled liquid nitrogen pumped directly from Europa's ice, Charleston explained, as they reached the sealed entrance to the sector. Someone must have deliberately sabotaged the pumps and disabled the backups. He placed his hand on the biometric scanner beside the massive security door. After a moment's hesitation, the door began to slide open, revealing a scene of chaos beyond. Smoke billowed from ruptured cooling lines, and warning displays flashed critical alerts throughout the laboratory. Through the haze, Jace could make out 2 figures working frantically at a control panel, not to repair the damage, but to ensure it couldn't be fixed. Stop! Charleston shouted, but the saboteurs had no intention of complying. The larger of the 2, a Taurian with distinctive blue-green scales, turned and fired a pulse weapon in their direction, forcing them to take cover behind equipment. Kira, can you? Jace began, but she was already moving, using the smoke and confusion to circle around behind the attackers. Charleston pointed to an enormous manual valve on the far wall. That's the emergency override for the cooling system. If we can open it fully, it will flood the system with enough coolant to prevent catastrophic failure. Jace nodded, gauging the distance. Cover me. Using equipment and workstations as shields, he made his way toward the valve, while Charleston created a distraction, calling out to the saboteurs and drawing their fire. The facility's countdown continued relentlessly. 2 minutes until automatic containment protocols engage. As Jace neared the valve, he heard a familiar growl cut through the chaos. Kira had engaged the Taurian saboteur. The sound of struggle gave him the opportunity he needed to sprint the final distance to the valve. The manual override was massive, designed for emergency use when all automated systems failed. Jace gripped the wheel and pulled with all his strength, but it barely moved, decades of disuse having seized the mechanism.
It's stuck!
He shouted to Charleston. Through the smoke, he saw Kira dispatch the Taurian with efficient brutality, then turn her attention to the second saboteur, a human who was still working desperately at the control panel, trying to complete whatever programming would ensure the facility's destruction. 1 minute until automatic containment protocols engage. Jace threw his entire weight against the valve wheel, feeling it give slightly. Sweat poured down his face as the temperature in the lab continued to rise. Somewhere behind him, he heard the distinctive sound of a pulse weapon discharging, followed by Charleston's cry of pain. Kira appeared beside him suddenly, her fur singed in places, but her eyes burning with determination. Without a word, she added her strength to his, both of them straining against the unyielding valve. 30 seconds until automatic containment protocols engage. With a sudden, grinding screech, the valve began to turn. Once the initial resistance was overcome, the mechanism moved more freely, and they spun it open to its fullest extent. Immediately, the sound of rushing liquid filled the chamber, and plumes of supercooled nitrogen erupted from vents throughout the lab. Temperature stabilizing, the facility's computer announced. Cooling system restored to operational parameters. Automatic containment canceled. The immediate crisis averted. Jace turned to find Charleston. The scientist was slumped against a workstation, clutching his side where the pulse weapon had grazed him. "Doctor!" Jace hurried to his side, while Kira secured the human saboteur, who had been knocked unconscious, either by her intervention or the sudden flood of supercooled gas. "I'll survive," Charleston grimaced. "What about the FTL prototype?" Jace checked the nearby monitoring station. "Stable. No permanent damage." He helped Charleston to his feet. "We need to get you to medical." "Not yet," the scientist insisted. "We need to secure the saboteur and extract whatever information we can." This was too coordinated to be opportunistic. Security forces arrived moments later, responding to the emergency with well-trained efficiency. The unconscious saboteur was taken into custody, and medics attended to Charleston, despite his protests that his work took priority over his health. As the immediate chaos subsided, Jace found himself standing with Kira in a quiet corner of the lab, watching as facility staff worked to fully restore systems and assess damage. "That was close," he said quietly. "Too close." Kira nodded, her orange eyes scanning the activity around them. "The female, Blackwood, is persistent. She will not stop with this failure." "No, but now we have one of her agents in custody. That gives us leverage." Jace glanced at Kira, noticing for the first time several injuries she'd sustained during the fight. Burns along her arms, a cut across her cheek. "You're hurt." "Minor damage," she dismissed. "The debt remains unpaid." Jace shook his head, a strange mixture of exasperation and gratitude washing over him. "You just helped save an entire research facility from destruction. I'd say that more than covers a single French fry." Kira looked at him, genuine confusion in her expression. "You misunderstand the nature of the debt. It is not measured by the magnitude of service, but by the balance of life force. You sustained me. I must preserve you in return. But you were injured protecting me. That is irrelevant to the debt." Before Jace could argue further, a security officer approached them. "Morgan, Dr. Charleston wants to see you both in the recovery ward." They followed the officer through the now stabilizing facility to the medical section, where Charleston was sitting upright on an examination table, his wound treated and bandaged, though he still looked pale. "The saboteur is talking," he informed them without preamble. "Seems Blackwood's payment wasn't enough to inspire lasting loyalty. He's confirmed that Sentinel Dynamics has been working to undermine our research for months, under orders from Naomi Blackwood herself." "Why?" Jace asked. "What does she gain?" Sentinel Dynamics has exclusive security contracts with Translite Corporation, which currently holds the monopoly on FTL technology. Our research threatens that monopoly. Charleston's expression was grim. The saboteur claims today's attack was a last resort after their attempt to frame you failed. Have you notified Earth Intelligence? Jace asked. Charleston nodded. They're sending investigators. Blackwood has powerful friends. But even she can't escape scrutiny after an attack of this magnitude is documented and witnessed. Good, Jace said, feeling some of the tension leave his shoulders. Then maybe this nightmare is finally over. For the facility, perhaps, Charleston agreed. But Blackwood won't forgive your interference. Jace, you've made a powerful enemy today. I seem to be collecting those lately, Jace replied with a wry smile. He glanced at Kira, who stood attentively nearby. At least I have good company for it. Charleston followed his gaze, studying the Philidian with newfound interest. Yes, your companion was quite impressive during the crisis. A life debt, I presume. I recognize the Philidian protective posture. Jace nodded. It's a long story involving French fries. The best stories often have humble beginnings, Charleston said with a smile. Now, I suggest you both rest while security processes the saboteur and secures the facility. My quarters are at your disposal. As they left the recovery ward, Jace felt the adrenaline of the past hours finally beginning to ebb, leaving exhaustion in its wake. The corridors had returned to normal operations, though security presence remained elevated throughout the facility. You saved my life back there, he told Kira as they walked. That Taurian would have shot me if you hadn't intervened. As the debt requires, she replied. But there was something different in her tone, a warmth that hadn't been present before. Kira, Jace stopped, turning to face her. You've more than repaid any debt. You've saved me multiple times now, risked your life for mine. By any reasonable measure, the life debt is satisfied. Kira stood very still, her orange eyes studying him with an intensity that made him acutely aware of how alien she truly was, despite her humanoid appearance. Is that your wish? She asked finally. To release me from the debt? Jace hesitated. The logical answer was yes, to free her from an obligation that had been disproportionate from the beginning. Yet, something held him back, a realization that had been growing since their first encounter in the bazaar. I don't want to be responsible for ending your tradition, he said carefully. But I also don't want you to stay because you feel obligated. That's not how humans form connections. How do humans form connections? Kira asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Voluntarily, because both people want to be together, not because of duty or obligation. Kira seemed to consider this, her ears twitching slightly as she processed his words. Among my people, duty and obligation are the foundation of all relationships. They provide structure and meaning. I understand that, Jace said. But there can be more to a connection than duty. There can be choice. Choice, Kira repeated, as if testing the word. You would give me the choice to leave, even though by my traditions the debt remains? Yes, Jace said simply. I would. For a long moment, Kira was silent, her expression unreadable to his human perceptions. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer than he'd heard before. If the choice is mine, then I choose to remain, not because of the debt, but because... She paused, seeming to search for the right words. Because I wish to see where this path leads. Jace felt something unexpected, a warmth that had nothing to do with the facility's environmental controls. I'd like that too, he admitted. As they continued toward the guest quarters, Jace was struck by how dramatically his life had changed in the space of a day. What had begun with a simple act of sharing food had evolved into something far more complex and meaningful. They had survived assassination attempts, sabotage, and direct combat. They had helped protect vital research that could change the future of interstellar travel. And somehow, amid all that chaos, they had formed a connection that transcended the initial life debt that had brought them together. As they reached the quarters assigned to them, Jace turned to Kira with a smile. "I think there's something we should do to mark this new arrangement." "What is that?" she asked, her head tilting curiously. "Get some more French fries. I know a place on the Starbound that makes them almost as good as the ones from the bazaar." Kira's whiskers twitched in what Jace was beginning to recognize as her version of a smile. "I would like that," she said simply. As Europa's eternal twilight cast long shadows across the facility, Jace and Kira found themselves seated in the Starbound's small galley, sharing a fresh batch of French fries. Outside the viewport, Jupiter's massive form dominated the sky, its swirling storms a reminder of the chaos they'd navigated together. "What will you do now?" Kira asked, carefully selecting another fry. "Blackwood has been exposed, but her influence remains." "Keep moving. Keep working," Jace replied. "That's what I've always done. But with better company this time." He paused, considering. "What about you? Now that you're not bound by the debt, what do you want?" Kira seemed surprised by the question, as if the concept of wanting something for herself was unfamiliar. "I have been warrior, guardian, exile, and debtor," she said slowly. "Perhaps now I can simply be explorer." "The Starbound could use an explorer," Jace offered. "Especially one who's good in a fight." Kira's orange eyes met his, and for the first time, Jace saw something there beyond duty or obligation, a spark of genuine connection. "Then we shall explore together," she said, reaching for another fry. "And perhaps find more of these potato things along the way." Jace laughed, a sound of genuine joy that felt foreign after the tension of recent events. "I think that can be arranged." As the Starbound's engines hummed to life, preparing for departure, Jace found himself contemplating the strange turns life could take, from a chance encounter in a crowded bazaar to a partnership forged in danger and sealed with French fries. They set course away from Europa, away from Proxima, away from the shadows of Blackwood's influence. Ahead lay the vast expanse of space, filled with planets to visit, jobs to complete, and undoubtedly new dangers to face. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, Jace wasn't facing the future alone. Beside him sat a blue-furred warrior with orange eyes and a newfound appreciation for Earth cuisine, who had chosen to stay not out of obligation, but out of choice. As the stars streaked past the viewport, Jace glanced at Kira, finding her gaze already on him. No words were needed as the Starbound carried them forward into the unknown. Two unlikely companions bound no longer by debt, but by something far more meaningful: the simple choice to face the galaxy together.